unless you're the people in charge or their bodyguards in the media, in which case opinions like that are a dangerous threat to your power and must be stamped out immediately. Until recently, for example, some citizens have been using social media, Facebook, to organize demonstrations against the severe lockdowns they're currently living under. Expressing your views about the decisions that politicians make is protected under our Constitution. You could argue, in fact, it's the whole reason we have a Constitution in the first place. It's literally enshrined in the First Amendment, and for a reason. But Facebook doesn't care. Facebook doesn't recognize the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't recognize our country's centuries-old norms. As CEO Mark Zuckerberg explained on ABC, people who complain about the lockdown and organize others to do the same have been removed from the site for providing, quote, misinformation.
How do you deal with the fact that Facebook is now being used to organize a lot of these protests to defy social distancing, defy the social distancing guidelines in states? Is somebody trying to organize something like that, does that qualify as harmful information?
We do classify that as harmful misinformation, and we take that down.
Misinformation. That's a term that should give you the shivers. It's how totalitarian regimes dismiss views that threaten their power. That's the country we're suddenly living in. The state of New Jersey recently issued criminal charges against a woman called Kim Pagan. Her crime? Organizing a protest against the lockdown. In other words, she criticized the governor of New Jersey, so his employees had her arrested. Are you comfortable with that? Our leaders are comfortable with it. They applaud it. It makes life easier when your critics shut up and go to jail. They like that. In Elizabeth, New Jersey, the mayor there is using unmanned drones to spy on citizens and make certain they obey. That sounds like something they do in China. And they do. In fact, the drones are literally from China. They're made by a Chinese company called DJI. The company has donated them to 22 American states to control unruly voters. It seems obvious those drones must be sending data back to their masters in China. The Pentagon believes they are. They've banned their use. But the mayor of Elizabeth doesn't care. The drones are helping him consolidate his power. He's for them. Over in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio doesn't seem to have drones just yet. He may, but for now he's got the next best thing. 8 million potential snitches all working for him. De Blasio has ordered his citizens to spy on their neighbors and report their neighbors if they behave in unapproved ways. Needless to say, it should make you very nervous when politicians leverage your fear to make themselves more powerful. It ought to terrify you when they start arresting people for the crime of disagreeing with them. Our media exist to push back against these kinds of dangerous excesses. That's why we have the First Amendment. Are we watching a flu d'etat? The press ought to be asking that question. They should get to the bottom of it, but they're not. Instead, they're cheering on the repression. Watch MSNBC explain how anyone who disagrees with the politicians they like is, needless to say, a racist.
What is it that they're trying to channel here? Is this sort of neo-Confederacy? And what the hell does that have to do with a pandemic?
America first is a phrase that was used by Charles Lindbergh and the Nazi sympathizers in 1939, 1940, 41. It became President Trump's rallying cry. You have that on the right.
When I look at these protests, what I see are a bunch of white people essentially saying, oh, it's affecting those people, so why do I have to change my life for them?
Let's be honest about what they are. They are the Fox News, Nazi Confederate death cult rump of the Republican Party.
It's not that hard, unfortunately, to turn a health crisis into a racial, ethnic crisis.
I think that what they're saying quite clearly, when you see the numbers, when you see the statistics, when you see the CDC data, is I want more black and brown people to die. Right? That can't. If you want the government to open up, then you want more black and brown people to die.
Joy Reid is the biggest race baiter on cable. Can you imagine putting that garbage on your TV channel in the middle of a pandemic, whipping people into a frenzy of paranoia and hate on the basis of zero evidence? So irresponsible, it's hard to believe it's happening. But here's the bigger theme, and you may be sensing it. Certain people would like to use this moment to elevate themselves and crush you. On The View today, host Joy Behar complained that not enough rights have been abolished during this pandemic. Exercising the right to bear arms, she said, should be treated going forward as a felony.
Why are you bringing guns to a rally? You want to call yourself protesters, leave your guns home. Those are terrorists who bring guns to things. to rallies. I don't trust that at all. And don't listen to these people.
These people should stay off television until they can get some critical distance and some wisdom. Something awful, you're watching it here, and threatening has been unleashed inside many of the people who lead this country. This isn't the media making excuses for fascist behavior. This is the media demanding more fascism now, immediately. The sad thing is what they could be doing. We have protests against lockdowns across this country. You may like them, you may not. But what does that tell you? Why are they happening? Did Rush Limbaugh do all that? No, he didn't. Here's the truth. If Americans had confidence that the government's response to this virus was wise and thoughtful and thoroughly rooted in science, they probably wouldn't be protesting against those decisions in the numbers they are. But they don't believe that, and they don't believe it for good reason. When the state of Michigan bans joint replacements but encourages abortions and lotto ticket sales, you know more than science is going on here. No epidemiologist recommended that. There's something else. But you wouldn't guess that from watching most shows on television. The media are not bothering to report on what we really know or don't know about the virus. It's fascinating, but they're ignoring it. And they're certainly not holding anyone in power to account. They're not explaining the science of why it's necessary to close pools and parks and beaches all summer, why it's scientifically required to tell citizens to snitch on their neighbors. They're not even addressing that. Instead, they're lashing out at the insolence, how dare they, of their fellow citizens for failing to silently accept it all. Many in the media seem to be enjoying this crisis, and they are. It's been a great opportunity to talk at great length about their all-time favorite subject, which is themselves, and how much more impressive they are than you. Here's that weird little guy on CNN.
It wasn't until this Friday night that I hit a wall. And that's when the tears came. So we have nothing to compare this with. So it can be incredibly alarming. It can be incredibly depressing. Media can help. Making media can help. But the emotions are real for everybody. They're a big part of the story.
Oh, barf. This is a guy who got a special exemption to the government quarantines he so fervently supports for other people. All of us in the media got that exemption, by the way. This is a guy who's working in a high-paying job when tens of millions of Americans are not working at all. Please be quiet. Your tears are not, quote, a big part of the story, and neither are you. For God's sakes, please stop talking about yourself. It is unsufferable. But they can't stop. The most consistent byproduct of privilege, always and everywhere, is narcissism. So it's not surprising that our pampered overlords just cannot shut up about themselves. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't make sense as a person until you learn that she grew up as Sandy Ocasio in an affluent suburb of Westchester and then went on to get some silly, pointless degree at a silly, pointless private college. Of course she did. It's so obvious once you know it. Thank you, Wikipedia. She is a child of privilege. She's not some kid from the streets. Someone who actually grew up in the Bronx would be far too embarrassed to drone on about herself on Instagram. Please. Suddenly, people like Sandy Ocasio seem to have a lot more power than they did before this pandemic arrived from China. That's at least as scary as the virus itself, and its effects will last much, much longer. You have a right to lawfully push back against that, and you should.